Hello and welcome to the Change by Design podcast, where we shine a light on all things engineering transformation. I'm Josh Corman, head of content at Lifecycle Insights, and I am joined once again by our CEO and chief analyst, Chad Jackson. Chad, how's it going?
Pretty good. Yeah. It's warming up here in Austin, Texas. It's already 64 degrees and it's 10. So, yeah.
I wonder. I'm a little bit north of you in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I wonder if I could count the temperature on both my hands. I'm doubting it a little bit at this point. So, got some distance between us. But I was wondering if you had been watching any of the Olympics, because working with Lifecycle Insights, or working here at the company, has engineering pilled my brain. So I sort of now interpret everything through the lens of engineering, and it started me thinking about what all goes into an Olympic Games. And I looked up the Team USA has several engineers as athletes. We have mechanical engineers, and I think there was a biomedical engineer. And so I was reading some stuff about that. But the most interesting fact I found was that the torch was engineered so that the materials would be as sustainable as possible, and it would use as little material as possible to go into the
Yeah.
making of it. I know that we've talked a lot about, sustainability as one of the kind of outcomes of engineering improvements and making change initiatives so that you can, reduce your costs on materials and be more environmentally friendly and some of that stuff. So, given that we're in the Olympic season, I thought, we could start with a little engineering trivia about the Olympics. So there you go. We've got a 3D printed, I believe, Olympic torch used to minimize material usage. So engineering touches all things.
Yeah, it does. It absolutely does. And I'm glad we've engineered pilled you because it means that we're doing our job. But no, seriously, yeah, mad respect for all those athletes that basically, for most of the time, they have a full-time job. And engineers they're just like everybody else. They're not, you could approach them, you could talk to them. It's okay.
Yeah, except for Austin Florian, who competes in the skeleton, which for those of you who don't know is the one where you go face first on your belly down a luge at high rates of speed, steering with I don't know what. I don't actually know how you change your directions, but he is an aerospace engineer, and it talks about how his engineering background has helped him as he rockets down this track at I don't know, 60, 70, 80 miles an hour. Some of the speeds they get up
Oh,
to
gosh,
are
that's
crazy.
crazy.
So Austin Florian, not quite normal in that he is willing to, undertake this sort of, terrifying event, but interesting that he's bringing his aerospace background to bear on that. So I am engineering pilled. You have done your job. And to that end, we can kick off and talk about engineering in earnest a little bit. You recently had the chance to go to 3D Experience World, and I know you came back from that with a lot to think about, a lot to talk about. As you are wont to do, your enthusiasm, leaps to the front of this kind of stuff. And I think there's like a giddiness to your anticipation for some of the exciting stuff you see. So tell us a little bit about what you took away from that experience and being at that conference and kind of what leapt out to you.
Yeah, yeah. So really, really good event. Basically, it's held by Dassault Systèmes, who provides SolidWorks and CATIA and Innovia, and also the 3D Experience platform, which is kind of where all of their customers are heading to that solution. But what was really interesting, and it's the recurring theme for the year, right? AI. So they introduced actually three AI. They call them virtual companions.
Mhm.
It was very interesting. So one's called Aura, another one is called Leo, and another one is called Marie. So they actually do have personalities. So the function for them is different. So Aura is helps with design exploration. Like, hey, we could explore this, we could explore this. And the interaction is more of like, hey, let's keep exploring. Let's keep kind of figuring out what other options are viable. Leo is very focused on engineering. So helping you set up simulation, looking at function, um, automating 3D modeling tasks. So that's about getting stuff done,
Mhm.
getting that assessment, building out the model, that type of thing. And then you have Marie, um, which was actually named after Mary Curie. And the idea there is that it is a expert scientist, if you will. So like an authoritative source of information around materials, chemistry, other kind of physics. Um, but what's most interesting about them is that they have different personalities. That
Mhm.
was a big takeaway for me.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I know we've talked a little bit in our explorations with what large language models are capable of, and trying to figure out how best to utilize them as they use that word companion, right? As someone who is kind of alongside, providing support and scaffolding maybe around what you're doing.
Yeah.
Last week or maybe it was in the last couple of weeks about AI scaffolding around some engineering ideas and how you could use it in a way that benefits engineers and works for kind of assisting that skill set in a way that it's not based on. We talked about things being based on code and language versus being based on these processes that for engineers are kind of hidden sometimes and almost taken off the
Yeah.
table as something you can um, interpret. But them being kind of functionally specific and maybe almost role
Mhm.
specific, it feels like that to me speaks to maybe a trend to trying to isolate and identify areas where these kinds of tools can be really helpful in specific ways for people doing very specific tasks, and not just sort of be a general tool that you kind of go to with questions and that has to pull from a much wider kind of set of knowledge or whatever underpinning as the foundation of its data. So I'm curious about what you think about that. Is do you think that that's kind of the direction that these things will go, and that you will have increasingly specified versions of AI tools to assist in these particular functions that touch engineering in some way or another?
Yeah. Well, I think kind of the way I'm thinking about it is what mode of work are you in? Right.
Hmm.
I mean, for a set amount of time, you might have a certain objective for that work. And this is actually where the personality matching, I think, is also really important. So, for example, with Aura, I keep having
Hmm.
to look at the names. Um, with Aura, you're in the mode of where like, okay, what's possible, right? And in the interact, and actually, they tuned the personality so that it'll help you explore. Like, hey, have you considered this? Have you considered this? Have you considered this? And that mode of work is very different from you know getting things done, like creating a 3D
Hmm.
model, executing a simulation for verification, that kind of thing, which is what you do with Leo. And Leo
Hmm.
is, let's get this done. Not like, don't get distracted. Don't go do that other thing. Stay here with me and focus
Right. Right.
on the task at hand. Right. And lastly, like, there's also the mode of like, I want the answer for this
Hmm.
thing. Like, I don't know what it is. I'm not an expert in materials. I need someone just to give me the answer so I can get my other work done. And that's what Marie
Hmm.
kind of fits in. It's authoritative. It says, the answer is this, period.
Hmm.
Right? Not like, hey, you go look around at all this other stuff. Although
Right. Right.
you could probably do a little bit of that as well. But the idea is that it is authoritative and it has an authoritative tone, even with its responses. So I think that is the mode. I think that's what we're going to see going forward out of AI.
Hmm.
Um, it will manifest in different ways with different providers, but I could see, if you're interacting with Claude, um, you switch to a different mode. Like, okay, I'm trying to do this type of work. So
Hmm.
I do think that is the way it's gonna become.
Interesting. Interesting. So taking kind of like you said, what you are doing at the moment and what functions sort of best help execute that kind of work might be how things get,
Yeah.
kind of broken down and parceled out. So it'll be interesting for, engineering companies looking at these tools because, we've talked about this ad nauseum almost with AI, which the challenge for many companies is assessing the potential value that a given tool can have for them amidst a ton of simultaneously arriving tools. It feels like
Yeah.
within the next 6 months, right? What you're describing that Dassault is doing, I'm sure other companies are working towards these kinds of ends as well, and they will be presenting those and trying to say, hey, we've talked a lot about how switching softwares is a big lift, and it requires a lot of compelling evidence that, this is going to be valuable. But it feels like this is maybe an opportunity that software providers will take to try to present that value and try to, sort of elevate the idea of here's how our tools can be
Yeah.
specifically helpful to you. So it will be interesting to see how organizations, measure all of this stuff and assess it. And, we've talked a lot about change
Yeah.
agents and doing that. The explorer role of change agents feels like that person is, this is where they can sink their teeth into and try to assess and say, this really for what we are doing or for what metrics we need to try to improve upon specifically, this is where the value is going to come from. That's
Yeah.
going to be, that's going to be a lot to take in and, a challenge, I'm
Yeah.
sure, to assess.
And I think it also affects what strategy you should pursue in terms of what technologies you want to leverage.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, an initiative looked like, okay, here's the role, here's the processes, and here's the technology. And definitively, we need these features, right? We know what they are. We need to implement them, and we need to reach a stable state again and then execute. I think because we're in an age right now of exploration and discovery with these tools,
Mhm.
like this isn't going to settle out for another year at least, right? I mean, you just mentioned it. I mean, the rest of this year, the conferences we go to, we're going to see announcements after announcements.
Mhm.
I think that changes the technology or IT strategy that companies need to take into account. And what I mean by that is you need to be flexible.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
with your initiative, you need to say, okay, this might be the process, this might be the role, but the technology that enables it can be dramatically different. And as a matter of fact, even the process might need to vary a little bit, right?
Mhm.
Because there might be some automation capabilities or intelligence capabilities that come out with AI that dramatically change your process.
Mhm.
Um, so I think the attitude needs to change a little bit to be less definitive and
Mhm.
more open to exploration and more open to, um, that you just haven't quite figured it out yet, and you need to let it breathe, which is an uncomfortable place, right? Especially if you're an executive leading an engineering organization. But, if you get something set in 3 months, it might be completely outdated in a year.
Yeah.
So, it's a
Yeah.
it's a difficult position to be in, and I think it requires a mindset shift.
Yeah, the flexibility and patience, because I think you're right in the rush to find the answer and get the thing that's gonna gain you a competitive advantage or, help you achieve the outcomes that you're looking to achieve. Um, like you said, there is I think the other side we talked about value and the assessing risk side of it. There is a real risk to trying to nail down exactly what these things are going to do for you and how they're going to be valuable going forward before because you're really making decisions without all of the information at the table because
Yeah.
it's still being developed at a rate, um, that feels incredibly fast, just even you using a model and it will say, this can make mistakes, but you know that it's improving. And as they go on, there are constant updates. Oh, now we've improved this feature. And that's only going to keep going. Like you said, process changes that come into play. It's not just,
Yeah.
it's not just the tool itself. It's what it might do to how you work and trying to nail that down, like you said, in 3 months and then having 6 months later, a new development that actually we need to pursue this now. And then we've talked a lot about just the burnout that can happen, the fatigue from a constant feeling of disruption. And that's another thing that maybe, engineering leaders, executives need to keep an eye on because this can be the kind of thing where it's every few months we've got a new sort of North Star, or a new tool that's going to step in and be the thing that changes it. And obviously that's really disruptive. So yeah, going to be fascinating to see how companies navigate all this because as we've talked about, it's changing so fast and, looking too far into the future right now feels like a dangerous
Yeah.
game to play, really.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you definitely have to be flexible and just find your comfort in the uncertainty.
Have fun, everybody. good good luck with the comfort and uncertainty in the world of engineering. Like you've said, not a place that folks are thrilled to be in all the time. I think that, like you said, initiatives and the way that we kind of assess them and think about those things is changing with technology. To segue a little bit into some of our discussion about our research and looking at initiatives. We've talked about reports being in process. We've talked about you know topical stuff like the success and resistance that engineering initiatives kind of go through, right? We've found that people are
Yeah.
successful, but they experience resistance. We've also, talked a little bit about research into MBSE and MBD stuff, and we've got those things, ball rolling on those things and some interesting findings coming out about that. So, talk a little bit about, kind of those recent findings and research and what folks can expect to see, coming out here in the next handful of weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. So in November and December, we conducted a research study, quantitative research study with a survey, got respondents. It was over 300. But we targeted three separate topics. So, what's it like being a change agent? What's that look like in engineering organizations, MBSE, and then MBD? So, Mm. we've been able to analyze the data across those three categories, and there's so much. There are so many findings that we've uncovered there with lots of implications. So we have a lot of publications that are going to be coming out on the Inside EX platform. That's where we publish all of our research. You can get a subscription. We actually are starting the founders program right now. We can lock in kind of a lower price for a while. We're
Mhm.
looking for partners to help us build it out. But we have a report coming out on success and resistance to change initiatives. And there's really interesting dynamics between the two. For example, a lot of people are encountering success, but you can't avoid resistance. That's something we've touched on again and again, and the research supports that. The second thing is the life of the change agent. We found that most change agents carry other responsibilities like IT as well as design and development. So they're overloaded. So, what's the profile of that change agent and what skills are they going to need to be successful? That's another one. So, let's shift gears, talk about MBSE. We have the state of it. We're going to improve the title, folks. Just be patient with us. But the idea is that you get insight into the adoption, success rate, and resistance around MBSE. And we are looking at benchmarking there as well. We'll look and see what the companies that are experiencing higher rates of success, what are they doing differently? So that will be a separate report, a benchmark report. And then with MBD, we actually have three things. So one is the state of MBD, MBE. So the organizations that are pursuing initiatives, are they realizing benefits? Are they achieving the vision behind it, which is engineering releases an MBD and the rest of the organizations use an MBD for their work? So that's one. The second one is super interesting, and we had not planned on this. It kind of came up. It's basically a change agent playbook to navigate the politics of the MBE. So because you are passing it over to manufacturing, quality, all these other functional departments, it's outside engineering. Those people don't have to do what you tell them to do, or even your engineering executive tells them to do, right? So the CEO likely has to get involved to push that vision out to all those other functional departments. And there's a lot of politics to navigate there because it's cross functional. So that's the second one for MBD. The third one for MBD is all about benchmarking. A very similar thing for the companies that have achieved the vision of releasing an MBD and then using an MBD. What are they doing differently? How successful are they? How much resistance did they run into? Mm, And what are they doing to be more successful? So there's a lot, right? Josh, you know this. You're writing and developing a lot of these publications, which I'm really excited about. But all that will be accessible on the Inside EX platform. So come and check it out. Join the Founders Program. getting in the community forum. We can talk about these and kind of go back and forth around the findings. Would love that.
Yeah, and to that point, I think we've got all the publications you just talked about where we've kind of done a review and analyzed findings. I think we want to keep looking at that data and keep trying to find interesting takeaways as we keep digging in, be in the community forum and may not be
Yeah.
visible elsewhere. So trying to provide as much depth as we can around some of what we found, because the more you cross tab and compare, what these different groups do and how they across different company sizes, but also across different types of initiatives and what brings success and what can help them diminish resistance. I think for me, one of the interesting takeaways from all of the research is the idea of resistance and that it's kind of an inevitable part of change initiatives, because of course it's significant enough to change the way people do things. There's going to be some hesitation, and you don't want none of that, right? You don't want zero resistance, because that's suspicious, frankly. It seems that if you experience that, either there are not platforms for elevating that resistance to the notice of people who are tracking it and trying to measure it, that resistance is there, it's just hiding. It's gone underground. It exists in
Yeah.
workarounds and people not using the current tools. You, of course, also don't want so much resistance, right? These extreme levels where it becomes, I think, the phrase you use that I like is open rebellion, right? You sort of have people saying, this is not going to work and you can't convince me that it's going to work. And there's this sort of, more feet dug in, heels dug in mentality to it. And at both of those poles, right, you're probably going to run into some issues, right? Because maybe the resistance won't surface until later in the process and that creates its own issues, or it will be such a slog to get through the efficiency of executing your initiative craters. But in the middle, right, enough resistance that you gain insight into what people are having problems with and what walls you might run into and what hesitations they have about tools, process, whatever it is,
Yeah.
but not so much that it grinds everything to a halt, right? It's the sort of manageable level of resistance where you can gain valuable feedback and apply it to improve the initiative and improve its outcomes.
Yeah.
And so I think looking at, what is that sweet spot of resistance and how things in MBSE and MBD work a little bit differently, what some of the challenges might be. You talked about MBD cross-functional communication and then the challenges of implementing something that so many different, aspects of a company have to touch. I'm watching the Olympics a lot. MBSE, I probably just violated like a copyright. They're very serious about that. They're going to come for the podcast. MBSE, has this really steep learning curve, and there's a lot of complexity in it. And even systems thinking and systems engineering in general requires some shifts sometimes, right, from traditional kind of single domain or mechanical engineering thinking. So digging into all that stuff and seeing how it breaks out and differs slightly depending on what kind of initiatives that you're implementing has all been really interesting. And like you said, we'll have those findings, and our kind of analysis of what they might mean, going forward coming out soon. So that's all, I think there's a lot of depth, right? There's a lot of stuff to chew on in there. And so we'll be breaking that stuff out, and I think you'll be seeing it visible across our different channels. So excited
Yeah.
to get that stuff in the world.
Agreed.
But, coming soon.
Yeah. I'm excited.
All right. In addition to our conversations on the weekly roundup podcasts here, you also do weekly podcasts with people from, when I say the industry, really, that's so broad, but engineering kind of across a wide spectrum, right? You've talked to folks who are involved in the kinds of initiatives that we just discussed with our research, MBD and MBSE specifically, and putting those into to play and kind of diving deep about their roles as change agents and how that has manifested in their career and how they apply it to those specific initiatives that we discussed. So talk a little bit about, this kind of a preview, right, of an episode that will be, that will be coming soon between a conversation with you and Pete Oliver Kruger and Adele Okachar. And tell me a little bit about that conversation and what folks can expect to hear from your talk with them.
Yeah. It was really, really good. It was, the main focus was actually was kind of a cross between Agile and systems engineering. And the idea of using frequent prototypes at the system level to kind of prove out and uncover issues at the systems level. So what we have found is that integrating a lot of times new to the world software, new to the world processors, semiconductors, new to the world board systems, in networks on a vehicle or aircraft that is brand new. Um, there's a lot of bugs. Big shocker. But a lot of companies struggle with that. So the practice in Agile of building frequent not physical prototypes, but frequent builds and applying standard tests to that to uncover root cause of failures. Very applicable and very useful in systems development. So it was really fascinating to get the perspective and also some of the dynamics with individuals that are not used to putting out something that's a perfect prototype if,
Mhm, mhm.
on the table in a conference room. So
Yeah.
fascinating discussion.
All right. So to follow up on what you just said about the discomfort, right, that some folks can feel putting out a build, right, these frequent builds, and putting that out there on a conference room table, a lot of eyeball looking at their work, not finished work, right, but that everyone acknowledges this.
Right.
But talk a little bit about, what did you guys discuss about that, and what is that discomfort issue, right? Who is discomforted, and what are the issues that they're likely running into when they have those feelings?
I think this is a fascinating look at the personality of engineers. Number one, a lot of engineers, I mean, frankly, when you're handed a set of requirements, it's really hard to fulfill all of them completely. That's just, that's the nature of design and development. It would be great if you could, but I think it's rare that you actually can do that. So I think this into the personality of an engineer, which is if you like them, they will continuously iterate on something until it's near perfect. And
Mhm,
you'll go way over your project timeline. They're just kind of like perfectionists. So putting something that is likely imperfect in front of others is it's really hard for engineers. I completely understand. It's legit. I mean, and it depends on your culture too, right? So if you're punished for failures, then it's really hard to come forward with this. But the benefits are undeniable. So
mhm,
the benefits are, for example, stick a prototype in front of a customer. And one of the stories we heard was that, yeah, they did this with, one of the companies they were working with. And what they found was the customer was like, that feature, I don't need that. What's it there for? And they cut the
mhm,
requirement out, making the project easier and simpler to satisfy. Um, Also, they uncovered gunks, right? So unknown unknowns, things that you could never have uncovered digitally because you didn't know to model that aspect of the system digitally. But when you do it physically, you can't avoid it, right? Oh, it won't boot because, one of the pins was off, with
mhm.
the port system with an electronic component. Oh, well, yeah, I'm glad we caught that early because we need to go find a different component now. So the benefits of this frequent prototyping approach is it's undeniable, and it doesn't completely replace digital simulations and modeling, but that they can be used together. And it's a fascinating perspective on how they can be kind of merged or melded together.
Mhm. And I think that echoes a conversation. I want to say that it was with Guy Zur that you had. The podcast episode is out. Folks can go check that out. I think we put a video on LinkedIn out there as part of your conversation. And he talked about the culture of failure, right? That specific idea that if you are able to cultivate that environment where the individual anxieties about putting the build out on the table and having all the eyeballs on it, it becomes less of an issue, right? And then you can sort of push that behind you, right? And leave that aside and just focus on what you're talking about, right? Which is discovering these things early in the process that are really going to save headaches for everyone as we go down the road, including those same engineers who might feel a little bit uncomfortable throwing out that build for review. And so I think, it's something that we're hearing from multiple places, right? The importance of building an environment where failure is not the worst thing that can happen, right? That
Mm-hmm.
it's all a part of by design, right? It's all part of the process. And building toward that. So, yeah, folks can check out that conversation. I think, Chad, when is that episode with Pete and Adelaide coming out?
That is coming out on February 26th. Yeah.
Oh,
Excited.
giddy with anticipations. Yeah, and I think that's your first podcast that we've put out here, talking to a couple of different folks. So getting that extra
Mm-hmm.
extra perspective in one conversation is pretty cool too.
Yeah.
All right, to keep it with MBSE, or with systems engineering, we talked earlier about some of the research that we've done. And I know that with MBSE specifically, some of the findings that we've been kind of talking about, behind the scenes, involve the expectations that people have for MBSE and what it's going to bring them, what benefits it's going to have, and how those expectations have evolved over time, and what we're kind of learning about how well MBSE is, or how these companies are hitting those goals related to MBSE. So talk a little bit about that shift in expectations, as well as what people are and are not getting out of their MBSE initiatives.
Yeah. This is really fascinating. And actually, I'm going to have an article on LinkedIn this next week about this specifically. But we had a question around, okay, what are you trying to achieve with MBSE? And we included a lot of traditional uses of MBSE, so developing a product architecture, an end item architecture, a system architecture. It's certainly one that's a classical one. Traceability, requirements to items is another one. I expected those to be high. And they were relatively high, but they weren't anywhere near the top. Instead, the top one, it's 67%. 2/3 of respondents selected collaboration and coordination as the use for MBSE. So
Mm.
that surprised me a little bit. I think it's representative in this audience was specific to engineering. So I
Mhm.
think the expectations around MBSE has shifted a little bit. Those things around architecture and traceability, they're kind of like table stakes. Like,
And
people expect that capability out there now, and they've shifted now to kind of what's next, what they expect out of MBSE next. So that was a fascinating learning, but it was very interesting also about who's actually achieving those goals. But what are your thoughts on that first?
Well, I think that, as one way to illustrate kind of what you're talking about, right? Some of the numbers behind this, you mentioned that 2/3 of, respondents identified collaboration, right? And this kind of like cross-functional, cross-team ability to collaborate, which I know that when we've written and talked about NBSC a lot, that is sort of the vision, right? That's the idea that is something that you're capable of. That you have this model, and that everybody can kind of have that single source of truth and work from that. Um, but what was interesting is, the 67% expected it, but they're not hitting that. They're nowhere near that number is achieving that goal, right? So I think it was 24%, right? Just under a quarter,
Exactly.
said that they were hitting that mark. And so I think that, as these expectations shift, is that a matter of, well, is it process oriented, or is it the way that you're implementing things on the company side? Is it, on the software side, or the tools and the way that they're built, maybe, not as effective as you thought they were going to be, or is it a training issue? And the why, is going to be variable from place to place. But, it is interesting that, as you noted, right, like what you expected to see at the top has kind of become a baseline expectation. And these other things that are more kind of pointing to the promise, the potential that, MBSE has promised for a long time.
Yeah.
That's where people's mindsets are shifting, but there is still a gap between what they want and what their hopes are for this kind of initiative and what they're actually able to achieve. And, I'm not sure, like I said, what the why is, or maybe it is really specific to each company. Do you have any sense of, what it is that is sort of causing there to be a gap between some of these capabilities? Because, we'll put this in the
Yeah.
report, but this wasn't the only expectation that folks had that didn't quite get met,
Yeah.
or is not getting met by the MBSE initiatives that they're
Yeah.
executing.
I think there's hints and clues in other questions that we asked, right? So we also asked, what are the biggest challenges or sources of resistance? And that was an open field
Mm,
question where you could type in whatever you want. So we were removing bias by not presenting options.
right.
Um, but the resistance, the top two were very, very telling. The first was people, and it was around 40%. The second one was learning curve, and I think it was in the high 20s, something in that range. It will be in the report. But I think that kind of talks to challenges on two fronts. So one is for the systems engineers, using these tools. There's a learning curve. SysML, whether you're talking 1.0 or 2.0, is a complex language, and the concepts are very complex. So there's a challenge for them to become productive with this to start with. And what do you include?
Mhm.
What do you not include? How fully detailed should the model be? But then if you talk about coordination and collaboration, it's not just the system engineers using it, it's the design teams, mechanical folks, electrical folks, getting them to understand these concepts
Mm.
and leverage it, not go in and change the model, but just reference it so they can understand what's the source of the requirements. Let me get more context. What states of the system is this applicable in? There's a lot of complexity for them as well. So there's a couple different aspects there. And I think that is a major contributing factor to this disparity of
Mhm.
67% are using MBSE for coordination and collaboration, but only 24% cited it as a business outcome. So uh, that's something needs to be done to close that gap. If organizations really want to realize the targeted benefits that they identified initially out of those efforts. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, because we've talked before about being able to get some benefit and some value at a small scale out of a tool. If one group is using it, that group might benefit from it. But the real value often comes when you are able to touch other parts of the organization and you're able to connect these people working across these different groups. And so, it feels like there's almost an exponential quality to that. It's like you can do the baseline, and the systems engineers, maybe they can work with the tools and there's value and benefit for them. But if you're targeting
yeah,
cross team communication, then that's not happening. Yeah, it feels like I said, what the why is for each company, is going to maybe differ a little bit. But closing that gap and getting to that point where, because at some point you're adopting a tool and you've executed initiatives, but not everybody is really running with it, and at that point you're only getting so much benefit out of putting it in place. And I think that, when you start talking about the investment, not just in finances, but in time and energy, and we talked about the disruption that can take place with these initiatives. When you start talking about trying to offset that and get to the benefits and mitigate the disruption so that you're executing more efficiently, being able to actually make the thing do what it is that you purchased it and implemented it to do is, it sounds like so self-evident as to almost like be a dumb thing to say. But I do think that there's like seeing benefit in one group is not as big of a, challenge, but it's really spreading these things out and making sure that they kind of bear out their full potential by
yeah,
incorporating as much of the organization as possible. Because that's if an organization hits that point, it feels like that's where things start snapping into place and
yeah.
you start seeing real, efficiency gains.
Well, there is a fascinating parallel in the findings between MBSE and MBD, right? So MBSE for systems engineering, for mechanical design documentation. And what we're seeing in both is with MBSE, with this finding we just talked about, that trying to get this outside of the systems engineering domain, they're authoring it and they want to use it for coordination and collaboration outside their team more broadly.
Mhm.
There are challenges there. There's a lot of friction. And then
Mhm.
with MBD, getting a 3D model plus PMI, engineering is authoring this stuff. They're creating those deliverables, but getting manufacturing, quality, everybody else to actually use it as the design deliverable, there's a lot of friction there. So that's where MBSE and MBD, getting them created, there's less friction.
Mhm.
Getting them used in other functional areas and other teams,
And
lot of friction. So this is a common challenge or barrier that needs to be overcome for both of these types of initiatives.
yeah, I think that, that breakdown right there and kind of the conversation we've been having the last couple of minutes is a good insight into what the reports that we talked about are
Mhm.
trafficking in, right? What questions are we asking and what are we trying to get to the root of as far as, what are the challenges that are in front of these organizations and what steps can they take, hopefully, to manage that, and
Yeah.
close some of those gaps that we discussed. So that's really interesting insight, and the reports are going to have, I think, a lot to say about the parallels between these types of initiatives and what is kind of true across change initiatives writ large. And we've touched a little bit on that with, the success versus resistance report that'll be out here, kind of, first up. But looking into the more specific initiatives and the research on NBD and MBSE, they have their own foible, their own quirks,
Yes.
right? But the ways in
Yes.
which organizations experience these things, no matter what kind of change they're trying to implement, or across a lot of different kinds of initiatives, is instructive. And so, eager to keep diving into this stuff in conversation. But this is really, I think, kind of a good glimpse into how the reports that we're putting out are going to feel and what we're trying to break down to really give insight that companies can take and use, because
Yeah.
that's what's valuable, I think, out of all this stuff. So fascinating to discuss it. I say this every episode, but I always learn a lot from having these conversations. But I know that we're looking forward to getting all of this stuff out and giving folks some tools to use as they navigate this stuff for themselves, because
Yeah.
it's a question almost every organization with engineering involved in it is going to have to answer,
Yeah.
about some of these things going forward.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm excited as well. I'm excited to get feedback, right? I mean, we try to be a learning organization. This is our perspective, but it's important to get others' perspectives as well.
Yeah, and I'm sure when we put, some of this stuff out and post questions on the community forum, there will be someone who says, "Well, what about this?" And we will say, "You know what? That's a great
It's a
question."
great point.
That's the sort of thing that we can take and apply, because, yeah, when people who are living this stuff out in their real lives see this stuff, there's going to be that moment of, "Oh, that applies," or "Here's how my situation lines up with that," or is actually a
Yeah.
little that helps us pose another question. So, like you said, definitely want to learn from folks as they kind of take this in, apply it to themselves, and what we can do next and how we can provide them with tools that are going to be useful in making some of these decisions. So, excited about that. Like you said, Chad, always good to talk to you. Love the conversation. I'm going to keep watching the Olympics and keep my ears open for other engineering tidbits. Thanks so much. We will catch you next time.